ونصلي ونسلم على رسوله الكريم أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Myself, Sayyid Iftikhar Ali Gilani, and I am PhD scholar at ISTAC, IIUM, and General Secretary of ISTAC Student Society. I welcome and thank all our distinguished participants, our professors, our staff, our lecturers, our students, and all the participants, and especially our respected Dean of ISP, Professor Dr. Abdul Bargot, Professor Deputy Dean, Professor Dr. Muhammad Fahem, Deputy Dean, Professor Dr. Saiful Aziz, Nick Abdullah, and all the participants. Dear participants, brothers and sisters, now I would like to start our meeting with recitation of Fatiha. Thank you so much. As you know, Institute of International Islamic Thought and Civilization, International Islamic University, Malaysia, doing many lectures and now in these days, a series of spiritual, intellectual, and mental well-being enhancement. The series of lecture has been organized by the Institute of Islamic Thought and Civilization. In this regard, we have benefited from the first 3 lectures, and today is the 4th lecture. As we all know that the blessing month of Ramadan is about to cast its shadow over us, and there are many verses in Quran and many hadiths. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in Quran, A'udhu billahi as-sami'il alim min ash-shaytanir rajim, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Shahru Ramadan allazi unzila fihi al-Quran hudal lin-nas. Another place, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, A'udhu billahi min ash-shaytanir rajim, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Ya ayyuhallazina amanu kutiba alaykumus siyam kama kutiba alal lazina min qablikum la'allakum tattaqun. Sadaqallahu Mawlana al-Azim wa sadaqa Rasulun Nabi al-Kareem. As you know that fasting has a great effect on our mental and spiritual status. And in today's lecture, its topic is also how fasting affects our mental and spiritual status. And our guest speaker is renowned scholar, Imam Feisal Abdul Rauf. He's not only scholar, he's author and interfaith leader. He led an effort to build an Islamic community center in New York. Imam Feisal Abdul Rauf is the founder and president of Cordoba House. He is the son of great scholar, Professor Dr. Muhammad Abdul Rauf, who was the first rector of International Islamic University, Malaysia, 1983 until 1988. And our rectory building of IIUM now is known as his father's name, Muhammad Abdul Rauf Building. Now, I would like to invite Mr. Professor Abdul Rauf to enlighten the hearts and minds of the participants regarding today's lecture. Professor Dr. Mr. Imam Feisal Abdul Rauf. Assalamu alaikum, sir.
Walaikum assalam, my dear brother. Thank you very much for your very warm and very inviting invitation to me and introduction to me. I thank you, and I thank Professor Barhout and all of the staff of ISTAC and UIA for inviting me to deliver this lecture today as part of your series of lectures on mental health and spiritual health, etc. When we use the word health, we usually imply, or what we're trying to reach, is the absence or removal of any illness or sickness. So when we use health, we also implicitly mean the removal of any sicknesses that we may have. Our spiritual masters have taught us that we human beings consist of 4 dimensions of being. There's our physical body, there's our intellect, our aql, our thinking capacity, sometimes called the mind. There's also our emotional being. Some of our teachers call it the heart, which means the part of us that feels emotions like love and hate and jealousy and envy, etc. And finally, the 4th part is our soul, our ruh, our spirit, which is the source of all our life, our physical life and our emotional life, etc. Because the moment the soul permanently leaves our body, that is when we die. Many human beings, or the majority of human beings, all recognize the difference between their body, their mind, and their emotion. But there are many who are not aware of the existence of their soul as an entity in its own right. And here is where fasting in Ramadan comes in. Because one of the byproducts of fasting is you become increasingly aware of your soul as a distinct and separate entity from your body, your mind, and your heart. What happens when you fast the month of Ramadan, and all of you in the audience are Muslims, you've experienced what happens when you fast. Maybe the first week you go through a period of adjustment, but after a week or two, and you are now settled in the normalcy and in the rhythm of fasting, is that you begin to feel a separation of your soul from the rest of the dimensions of your beings. So instead of feeling, I am hungry, you feel a slight separation between you and your body, that your soul is where your I exists, and my body is the one that is hungry. Or you may have something that normally, let's say somebody tries to make you angry, says something that makes you, emotional or upset. Normally you would react immediately. But when you fast, you will feel a split-second time lag between this urge or the stimulus to make you angry and your ability to respond. And during that split second, you may feel as if someone is trying to poke you. But you may feel, because you are fasting, that you don't have the energy, or you don't want to spend the energy to respond. So you stay calm and you feel better over your now increased self-control over your emotion. So this is one of the byproducts of fasting, that you discover the separation between your soul and your emotion, between your soul and your body, between your soul and your intellect, your thinking capacity. There's an analogy I've used to explain this. And that's if you take a glass jar and fill it with a mixture of sand, little water, little oil, and leave some air on the top, and you seal the cap, and you shake it vigorously, you'll get an emulsion, a mixture that, all of them mixed up together. If you let the jar stand overnight and look at it in the morning, the next morning, you will discover that the elements are now separated. The sand is at the bottom of the jar, the water is above it, a layer of oil above that, and the air on top of that. So analogously, during the regular year when we're not fasting, your soul, your mind, your heart, and your body are occupied with the busyness of life. They're often mixed up and jumbled up. But when you fast Ramadan, it's like keeping the jar still. This is why I say after a week or two, you begin to feel the difference between the soul, the emotion, the mind, and the body. And this self-recognition of the components of yourself is an important step in self-knowledge, in self-understanding, and in self-healing as well. Why is that? Well, we are most familiar with physical illnesses and are fairly expert in recognizing many of its causes, like we get the flu or COVID, diabetes, gastric problem, cancer of various kinds, heart problems. These are all physical problems. But we are usually less expert in recognizing mental, emotional, or spiritual illness, although they are just as real as physical illness. Another observation and fact is that illness in one of our component of our beings can have an impact in another component of our being. For example, if you're emotionally stressed, it can create gastric problems and potentially an ulcer, or it can lead even to a heart attack. So it's an example of an emotional feeling which leads to a physical illness. Medical experts have also informed us that some emotional trauma invariably occurred before the onset of cancer, about a year or so before people get cancer. We've gone through a very, very strenuous physical, emotional period of stress. So stress can also cause cancer, although cancer can also be caused by physical causes, such as cigarette smoking or exposure to toxic chemicals, breathing fiberglass fibers, etc. You also may have heard of people having a brain tumor, a physical tumor in the brain, which, because of the pressure that it creates on the brain, results in eccentric behavior. So this is an example of a physical cause causing a mental illness and mental incapacity and emotional imbalance. It also can happen. You've also heard of people who receive a big blow on their head and they suffer amnesia, for example. Physical trauma can result in mental incapacity. This is what I mean by a disease in one part of our being can have an impact and cause sickness in another part of our being. So each part of our four components of being, an illness in any one of them can create an illness in another part as well. Now, one of the challenges in medicine is correctly diagnosing the disease. You may have heard of people who think they have heartburn, gastric problem, where in fact they're having a heart attack. So correctly diagnosing, or maybe they think they have a heart attack, but it's actually heartburn. So correct diagnosis of a problem is actually critical in being able to cure it, because a wrong diagnosis means that you will be treating a problem that probably doesn't exist, and that you are ignoring the real cause of the problem and therefore not treating the real problem. Now, I'm not a medical doctor, nor am I a psychologist or a psychiatrist, but as a spiritual teacher, I'm aware of spiritual disease and illness. And it is also true that spiritual diseases and illnesses can lead to illnesses in our three other domains. Now, one category of spiritual illness, which most of you are familiar with, is spiritual possession. That is when a human body is not only the home to its own soul, but to a jinn that also occupies it and messes with the occupying soul. The solution here, of course, is what is called exorcising the jinn, persuading it to leave that person. But other than that, most of the other spiritual illnesses are due to bad practice, which is why our spiritual teachers have talked and written about what they have called diseases of the heart, or even diseases of the soul, if you wish. And here they mean both the heart as the emotional being and the heart as the container of the spirit or the soul. So emotions like greed, like jealousy and envy, like lust, these are examples of such spiritual emotional diseases which they urge us to avoid. But avoiding these requires self-control and recognizing the difference between greed and ambition. Now, to recognize the difference between the good and the evil aspect of every emotion, because good and evil are very often the same emotion. If you control it, is good, but if you don't control it, it becomes evil. So, for example, ambition is good. It's good to be ambitious, but it's not good to be greedy. It is good to love, but lust is not good. Wishing to be as good, as smart, or as beautiful, or as intelligent as someone I know is good, or someone you know is good. But to be jealous of them, to be envious of them, to feel hasad, that is evil. Wanting to be wealthy and to be rich is good. But attachment to material possessions and feeling that your worth as a human being is based on your material possessions, now that is not good. So the teaching and the process of ensuring that we do not suffer these spiritual diseases requires self-control. And here is where fasting is one of the methods which helps us. As many of you know, the Prophet said in the hadith, there is a zakah to everything. And the zakah of the body is fasting. When I first went to the United States in the mid-1960s, I was very surprised and impressed by a book I read by an American medical doctor, a non-Muslim American doctor, who wrote this book on how he cured many diseases by having his patients fast. His procedure was to have them check in as inpatients in his hospital or his private clinic, whatever you want to call it. And he prescribed to them fasting. The minimum was 3 days, maximum was 40 days. Some he gave 7-day fast, 10-day fast, 21-day fast, 30 days fast. So it ranged from 3 days to a maximum of 40 days. They were inpatients. They lived in his clinic. And during this time, they did not eat any solid food for the whole time. All they did was drink water. He checked them regularly daily, gave them mineral supplements and vitamin supplements so that they would not suffer any serious deficiency in that regard. And he claimed that he cured patients from a variety of diseases, which proves the prophetic hadith we just quoted, that fasting is the zakah, or the purification of the body. But as we know, fasting also purifies the emotions and the soul, because by slowing down all of that, it slows down the anxieties. The Prophet even recommended fasting if you are not married and you can't control your sexual desire. He recommended fasting. So it shows how fasting helps purification. And we've all experienced how our minds feel clearer after fasting the whole month of Ramadan, and we feel that our willpower has been strengthened as well. In fact, I have 2 friends of mine in the United States who 30, 40 years ago used to do a juice fast for a week, a whole week, at least once a year and usually twice a year. During this week, they would eat no solid foods. They would just have juices for a whole week. And invariably, they looked better, they looked trimmer, they lost some weight after the week. And they said that they felt healthier, they felt their minds were clearer, and their willpower stronger. So all these demonstrated experiences of others teaches us that fasting is a valuable tool in enhancing our physical health, our emotional health, our spiritual health, and our mental health. Again, as I said earlier, one of the first things that we learn from fasting is recognizing the different components of our beings. The next thing we hopefully gain from fasting is controlling our emotions. For the Prophet has said in the hadith that fasting is not just avoiding food and drink, but it's also avoiding all sin, such as speaking ill of others, for example. And sin has been defined as one of the definitions of sin is that which is harmful to you. Sin is, of course, disobedience to Allah. But disobedience to Allah is harmful. So sin is, by definition, that which is not good for you. And you're all familiar with the hadith where the Prophet said that there's many a person fasts, but gains nothing from his fast, but hunger and thirst. And many a person performs Qiyam al-Layl, that's the Salat Tahajjud, or the night prayer, but gains nothing from his prayer but fatigue. So this hadith teaches us that while, yes, avoiding food and drink is part of the definition of fasting, it is not the whole definition. Because our brother quoted in his introduction from Surah Al-Baqarah, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الصِّيَامُ كَمَا كُتِبَ عَلَى الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. O believers, fasting is prescribed for you, as it was prescribed for those who came before you, so that you may be pious. لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. So, from the Islamic juristic perspective, لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ here is the legally operative cause, what is called the illah in Islamic law. So the reason why Allah wants us to fast is in order to get taqwa. So if fasting does not give us any taqwa, our fasting is essentially useless. That's the meaning of the prophetic hadith, that you get nothing from your fast but hunger and thirst. Why? Because your fasting in such an instance has failed in achieving its intended objective. This is why, brothers and sisters, your intention is important. And intention, as Imam Shafi'i said, when referring to the very first hadith in the collection of Sahih al-Bukhari, that first hadith says, إِنَّ الْأَعْمَالَ بِالنِّيَّاتِ, which means indeed actions are judged by their intentions. Imam Shafi'i said that in this hadith is half of all wisdom. So brothers and sisters, as you prepare to enter Ramadan in 2 weeks from now, make your intention and clarify your intention. Now, what intention means, brothers and sisters, is knowing what you want to get out of Ramadan. Not that you just, okay, I'm going to stop fasting and drinking. I'm going to stop eating and drinking, I'm sorry. Well, that's not enough of an intention. You have to know what you want to get out of Ramadan. Let me give you an analogy to explain what I mean by this. When you go to the supermarket, you just don't go there for for a walk. You go there with a particular intention. If you intended to go to the supermarket just to get milk because you're out of milk, that is all you will come out of the supermarket with. So if you went to the supermarket because you wanted milk, but you did not get milk, you have not fulfilled your intention. This makes it clear that knowing what you want and focusing on getting it is important. Now, let's say your intention was to make chicken curry. This is a more ambitious intention. You would need to know the list of ingredients for chicken curry. And you have to get all the ingredients: chicken, onions, garlic, the right kind of curry mix, rice, maybe a can of coconut milk, santan, as they call it here. If you forget to buy the chicken, you will not be able to make the chicken curry. So it's important to know what you want, what your intention is, and focus on getting it. So if your intention is to make a chocolate cake instead of chicken curry, then your list of ingredients will be obviously have to be different. If you have no clear intention at all, or if your visit to the supermarket is just because your mother asked you to come along, then your visit to the supermarket will just be an act of walking through the aisles. Now, we all know that 100 people may walk into one and the same supermarket, but they each come out with different items because their intention, their niyyah, what they wanted to get from the supermarket is different. The same applies to Ramadan, brothers and sisters. 1 billion people will walk into Ramadan this year. But will they come out of Ramadan with the same items, with the same accomplishments? No, they will not come out with the same accomplishments. Why? Because their niyyah was different. Their intentions were different. Their understanding of what intention means is different. Their experience differs. What they bring with them into their act of fasting is different. And of course, what Allah may have decreed for them also may differ. So the question that each of you needs to ask yourself is, what is your intention this Ramadan? What do you want to get out of fasting this month of Ramadan? Do you have a clear idea of what you intend to get out of it? Or are you just planning on walking the aisles of Ramadan with some fuzzy ideas in your head? If your intention in fasting Ramadan is to gain spiritual health and mental health, then inshallah, you will get it. Personally, I always urge my congregation to make the intention to gain in taqwa, and the other intention I recommend is to experience Laylatul Qadr. Why do I mention these two things? First, because Allah specifically states it. Allah says that He has prescribed fasting Ramadan for us so that we would gain in taqwa, in piety. So therefore, making this part of your intention is at least fulfills the Quranic rationale and operative cause for the command of us to fast. The Prophet also urged us to look for Laylatul Qadr. Therefore, seeking to the experience of Laylatul Qadr is something which is, you might call, a prophetic requirement upon us. Now, the experience of Laylatul Qadr is primarily a spiritual one. If you fasted, observed the fast properly, you slowed down your physical being, your mental being, and your emotional being, hopefully you will amplify and strengthen your spiritual being, your soul, your ruh, and amplify your sensitivity to spiritual dimension. And it's the spiritual dimension which experiences Laylatul Qadr primarily. It is primarily a spiritual experience. Brothers and sisters, the experience of Laylatul Qadr can happen anytime in the month of Ramadan. Because there are a hadith in which the Prophet confirmed that some of his companions experienced Laylatul Qadr in the first 10 days of Ramadan. So do not insist on when you experience Laylatul Qadr. Laylatul Qadr is not purely a result of your action. It is a gift to you from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When you feel it, you have to be grateful for it. Another way to help us in fasting the month of Ramadan and to heighten our spiritual sensitivity and spiritual earnings or winnings is by reciting the Quran, preferably aloud. There is value in reciting the Quran even if you do not grasp its meaning. There is additional value in attempting to understand more of the Quran than you do. There's additional value in listening to the sounds of the Quran and feeling its sounds. This is why some of us recite as much of the Quran as we can in our nightly Tarawih prayers in Ramadan as well. Finally, brothers and sisters, the last part of my lecture on spiritual health is the value of doing dhikr, which is actually dhikrullah, remembrance of Allah. For Allah says in Surah Taha, which is Surah 20, verse 124, وَمَنْ أَعْرَضَ عَنْ ذِكْرِ فَإِنَّ لَهُ مَعِيشَةً ضَنْكًا وَنَحْشُرُهُ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ أَعْمَى, which means, and whoever turns away from remembering me, from my remembrance, for him will be a narrow life or a constrained life. And on the day of resurrection, we shall raise him blind. To emphasize this verse to the Malay members of my audience, I'll give you the Malay translation. Dan barang siapa berpaling dari peringatanku, maka sesungguhnya baginya penghidupan yang sempit, dan kami akan menghimpungkannya pada hari kiamat dalam keadaan buta. Allah also says in Surah Rauf, Surah number 13, verse 28, الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَتَطْمَئِنُّ قُلُوبُهُم بِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ أَلَا بِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ تَطْمَئِنُّ الْقُلُوبُ. Those who believe, their hearts being at rest in God's remembrance. For in God's remembrance, our hearts at rest find comfort or comforted. Which in Malay means orang-orang yang beriman dan hati mereka menjadi tenteram dengan mengingat Allah. Ingatlah, hanya dengan mengingati Allah lah hati menjadi tenteram. Also Allah says, وَاذْكُرُونِي أَذْكُرْكُمْ. Remember me and I will remember you. Which is how and why dhikr is effective. Because when Allah remembers us, Allah is by definition as-salam, one of his names. We feel peace. We feel at rest. The objective of all our acts of worship is for Allah to remember us and for Allah not to forget us. So as Allah says, "Adhkuruni adhkurkum." So the purpose of our remembrance of Allah, that Allah will remember us, not to forget us. So brothers and sisters, may you all experience, inshallah, a very blessed Ramadan this month. I hope you make your intention as to what your shopping list is that you want to get out of Ramadan. Make sure taqwa and al-qadr is on your list. There's anything else you want. And may your hearts find peace and rest with Allah and in His blessed remembrance, inshallah. My dear brothers and sisters, thank you for inviting me. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We are very thankful to you and on behalf of Institute of Islamic Thought and Civilization, International Islamic University, Islamabad, on behalf of our respected Dean, Professor Dr. Abdul Aziz Bargot, our Deputy Dean, Professor Dr. Faham, our Deputy Dean, Professor Dr. Nick Abdul Azizi, and all of our lecturers and students and all the participants. I am very thankful to you, a great scholar, Imam Feisal Abdul Rauf, for his detailed and thoughtful talk on today's topic. As you know, Ramzanul Mubarak is coming, and may Allah Almighty help us to act the benefit us from the blessings of Ramadan. Ameen, Ya Rabbal Alameen. Jazakumullah Ahsan al Jaza. Any brothers and sisters, any participant who want to ask anything about today's topic, the floor is open. I think you can also write your question in chat box also. Prof. Abdul Aziz also thinking. Dear Prof, if you want to say something, Prof. Dr. Abdul Aziz Bargot, our respectable Dean, he thanks Imam Faisal for informative lecture.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.
Wa alaykum assalam wa rahmatullahi.
First of all, let me thank Brother Imam Faisal for coming and giving us all this hikmah and wisdom. Especially, we are expecting Ramadan coming in, though short, but I think a lot of meanings and wisdom is in what Brother Imam has just mentioned to us. I think I was expecting him to add more ideas and views so that we get enough food and zed for the 1 month of Ramadan. So we get some
energy. To practice fasting, Dr. Abdul Aziz. I want to practice fasting.
Yeah. So really, this is really good. They say short and sweet. Brother Imam, I want just to ask you, you mentioned about this idea of how fasting becomes a cure to many mental, psychological, and other things related to our soul and heart. And in fact, I read a lot about how the American and even in Europe, they use now, even in Japan, fasting as one of the ways how to help people cure certain diseases, whether the bodily one, the physical, and also the mental one. How do you see the Muslims themselves exploring this area or this medical clinic of Ramadan and fasting and developing it as part and parcel of maybe our wellness, our well-being? How do we capitalize on this? I heard and I read that in the US now there are more tens of thousands of clinics which prescribe this. But for us, we got this from the code of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, from the guidance, and we have the practice of the Ummah on this. So how do you see further developing this area to become something structured and something that we can use it not only for the perspective of Ramadan, but for the overall wellness of the Muslim as an individual and community and also Ummah? If you have any comment on this.
Well, I mean, I'm not, as I said in my talk, I'm not a medical doctor, so I do not claim to have the requisite expertise on this. Having said that, I have read many years ago of individual Muslim doctors who have observed that, for example, people who tend to have gastric problems, when they fasted, the incidence of gastric problems actually went down, which is counterintuitive. You might think that, oh, they have to eat, not leave their stomach empty, so they don't have gastric problem or ulcers. But he found that fasting actually, because it resulted in a reduction of the acid, because when you eat, the stomach will produce the acid to digest the food. But because you fast slows down your processes, it slowed down the production of acid and resulted in less incidence of ulcers. And which is why Allah says, and if you fast, it's better for you if you knew. And Allah mentions this in the verses where He says that if you are sick or ill, then you may not fast. May fast a number of days outside of Ramadan. Of course, I mean, if the illness is related to, I think the fact that Allah tells us that if we are ill, we may not fast, but also tells us at the same time that fasting is better for us if we really knew. It shows us two facts. One, that is that, yes, there are instances when you are sick with a disease and you just cannot fast. We know that. But there are some illnesses or some conditions which actually can be healed by fasting. think this is what Allah is telling us here. So this is how I would, but it requires research. It requires structured research, scientific research to provide the evidence that it. But by the very fact, as you mentioned, in America and Europe and even in Japan, people are using fasting as one of the methods of healing people from physical illnesses. I think that is in itself a demonstration of and a proof of the healing capacity of Ramadan, of fasting.
Thank you, Prof. My teacher, Professor Dr. Imtiaz Yusuf, want to say something. Hello, Ustaz.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much, Imam Abdul Rauf. I have a lifelong question. Why does the effect of fasting among the Muslims disappear suddenly after Ramadan until next Ramadan? Why and how can we sustain that spirit of Ramadan throughout the year?
That's an excellent question. I don't pretend to know all the answers, but I think one of the reasons why we lose it is because we overeat. We overeat. I mean, you know, you go to Ramadan buffets right now and all over the Muslim world, you will find an excess of food. Yeah. I mean, real excess of food. And I mean, I remember some years ago, I was visiting Singapore, and a friend of mine, an Imam there, took me to visit various people on one night after breaking fast in Ramadan. And then everywhere we went, we had to eat. I said, I can't eat anymore. I said, no, you have to eat, you know, otherwise people will be upset. And I said, the Prophet said, you know, we're a qawm that, you know, when we eat, we don't fill ourselves. You know, and we don't eat until we are hungry. And if we are, and when we eat, we do not fill our stomachs. Now you have inverted this hadith. You have made it like we eat before we are hungry, and we stuff ourselves. Yeah. So I think this is part of the problem. I mean, you know, who of us after the month of Ramadan, on the day of Eid al-Fitr, you find it very difficult you don't have much of an appetite.
Right.
But when you visit your friends, oh my goodness, if you don't, I made this ras malai just for you, Imam Rauf. You know, you have to taste it. I know you love this. You have to taste it. So this is the problem. I think that's one problem. There may be others, but I think the fact is that we revert to the bad habit. You see, part of the purposes I see it of fasting is to help us chip at a bad habit. So let's say if you are, you know, you have a problem with the issue of lust, all right? So the Prophet advised fasting. So you stop fasting, now you don't go all back to being lustful. So, yeah. But we tend to just can't wait to fall back into the to rush back into it. So, so fasting is intended to, it's like people who want to lose weight. So you diet in order to lose weight, but once you've reached your weight loss, means you don't go back to stuffing yourself like you used to before, because what happens, you will immediately gain your weight back. So it's that kind of behavior where the month of Ramadan is like a dieting exercise, and what we should do really is to moderate our consumption. That's
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. I am very thankful to Professor Dr. Imam Feisal Abdul Rauf, and very knowledge-provoking lecture. And I'm also very thankful to our respected Dean, Professor Dr. Abdul Aziz Burkot and Professor Nick Abdul Azizi, who give us this platform that it's very useful for us, for our students also. I'm very thankful to you. Inshallah, see you in another lecture.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And now I would like to request all our participants for please open their cameras and for a group photo. Hello, Ustaz, Professor Nick, I request that please, you are expert